Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today, I continue to bring you the love story of Ly Hoai Ca and Hùng. That morning, the atmosphere inside Hoai Ca's small house was still quiet, so quiet that the faint sound of the wind slipping through the cracks of the door could be heard clearly. The weather was slightly chilly, with a thin layer of mist lingering on the trees in the garden, covering the scenery in a soft, hazy veil that made everything seem slower and gentler than usual. Inside the simple yet tidy house, Hoai Ca woke up early, busily preparing a pot of hot tea. The light aroma of tea spread through the air, blending with the morning stillness and creating a rare sense of peace. Tu Dung came by to visit Hoai Ca very early that day. Her face still carried signs of exhaustion after many sleepless nights, yet when she saw Hoai Ca, her expression seemed to soften. The two sisters sat facing each other at an old wooden table, each holding a warm cup of tea. Their conversation unfolded slowly, without haste. Tu Dung talked about her current life, about her ongoing search for a job that still hadn't led anywhere suitable, about the temporary room she was renting nearby, cramped and damp, barely enough to shield her from sun and rain. What weighed most heavily on her heart was her mother back in the countryside, seriously ill, with daily medical expenses piling up while her savings were steadily running out. Hoai Ca listened with her familiar patience. She didn't interrupt or press with questions, only occasionally nodding, her eyes reflecting quiet empathy. When Tu Dung hesitated, Hoai Ca gently asked and encouraged her bit by bit, her voice neither loud nor low, just enough to make the other person feel understood. That calm presence eased Tu Dung's heart, as if part of the burden she carried had been set down. Noticing that Tu Dung was still uncertain about how to spend the day, Hoai Ca invited her to join in harvesting cassava on the plot of land by the stream, a place Tu Dung's mother had once lent to Hoai Ca when her family was struggling. The path leading there was familiar, yet it looked different after the recent flood. The vegetation along the stream still bore traces of the water, the soil soft and damp. Many cassava plants had been knocked over, their stalks crisscrossing, making it seem at first glance as though the crop had been completely lost. But once they began working, they realized that thanks to the nourishing alluvial soil, the cassava roots beneath were still large and firm, buried deep in the earth. The two sisters worked together, cutting down stalks and digging up roots. At one point, the slippery ground nearly caused Tu Dung to fall, and Hoai Ca quickly reached out to steady her. They both laughed at the clumsiness of the moment. One passed the hoe to the other as they worked, talking as they went, sometimes about the past, sometimes about the smallest details of everyday life. Beads of sweat fell into the damp soil, but in return came light, relieved laughter echoing across the quiet countryside, breaking the stillness of the morning. After finishing the harvest, they brought the cassava home. Hoai Ca lit the stove and washed each root carefully, her hands moving quickly yet with care. It was her first time making cassava cakes, yet she approached every step slowly and meticulously. As she worked, she asked Tu Dung questions, then showed her each step again, as if afraid that even a small mistake might ruin the batch. The small kitchen gradually warmed, steam rising gently as the scent of cooked cassava filled the space, simple and familiar, soothing both of them without a word. When the cakes were done, they took them to the market to sell. The rural market wasn't crowded, but there were enough passers-by. The two sisters called out to customers with friendly smiles. The cassava cakes were plain and unadorned, yet rich with the flavor of the countryside, and many people stopped to buy them. Before long, the basket slowly emptied, then became completely bare. Seeing the empty basket, Tu Dung couldn't hide her small joy, while Hoai Ca only smiled softly, as if everything had unfolded exactly as it should. When it came time to divide the money, Hoài Ca quietly handed half of it to Tu Dung. Startled, Tu Dung hurriedly waved her hands in refusal, saying she had already troubled her sister too much. But Hoài Ca kept her voice gentle and calm, telling her that she was going through a hard time and needed the money to take care of her mother, so she shouldn't overthink it. She didn't add anything more. She simply placed the money into Tu Dung's hand. That uncalculating kindness made Tu Dung choke up, her throat tightening as words failed her. For Hoài Ca, helping others in difficult times was something she did with all her heart. She never thought about receiving anything in return, nor did she consider it a great sacrifice. To her, it was simply the right thing to do, just as her mother had taught her long ago. While taking a short rest, sitting with their backs against the porch, Hoài Ca suddenly mentioned Hùng. Lately, he had been coming home earlier more often, despite working far away and under considerable pressure, simply because he wanted to spend more time with his wife and child. At the sound of his name, Hoài Ca's eyes visibly softened, a faint smile appearing on her lips. Yet deep within that gaze lingered a small pause, a vague, formless worry, quietly existing, one that even she herself had not yet found a name for. At Hung's mother's house, the atmosphere was completely opposite to the peaceful calm at Hoài Ca's place. The small, familiar home suddenly felt heavy and suffocating, as if every breath were being tightly compressed. The door had barely been closed when loud, forceful knocking echoed from outside, rapid and aggressive, without a trace of courtesy or restraint. Before she could steady herself, a man from the Lone Shark group stepped inside, his manner rough, his cold eyes sweeping quickly across the room. His voice rang out sharply, impatient and unyielding. He began listing the old debt in exact detail, every bit of principal, every layer of interest piled up over time. What had already been a large sum had now accumulated into a figure that left her dizzy. Each word he spoke felt like a knife cutting into her mind, sending her heart racing and her hands trembling uncontrollably. She tried to explain, tried to beg for more time, but her words were quickly drowned out by his hostility and the open threat etched clearly on his face. He didn't stop at demanding money. The man deliberately brought up parts of her past that she had long tried to bury. Dark memories and old mistakes were dragged out mercilessly, used as a way to crush her spirit. Each time they were mentioned, she lowered her head even further, her hands clenched tightly together, fingernails digging into her skin without her even realizing it. Fear was unmistakable in her eyes, not only fear of losing money, but fear that things she thought had long been laid to rest were being stirred up again, fear that one day the truth might reach her son's ears. In desperation, she rummaged through the house, gathering every last bit of money she had left. It was the small amount she had saved over time, meant to cover her frugal daily expenses. Her hands shook as she placed the money on the table, fully aware that it was nowhere near enough to cover the debt hanging over her head. But at that moment, she had no other choice. After handing it over, she pleaded for time, promising that she would go to their company the next day to settle the rest. Her voice grew weaker with each word, almost turning into a plea. The man glanced at the stack of money and let out a cold smile. He said little more, but his eyes carried a clear warning. When he finally left, the house sank into a terrifying silence. She stood there for a long time, as if she no longer had the strength to sit down. The space around her felt emptier than ever, filled only with confusion and a fear that had yet to fade. Just then Hoài Ca happened to stop by. The moment she stepped into the yard, she sensed that something was wrong. There was no familiar greeting, no sign of the usual busy movement. When she saw Hoài Ca, Hung's mother flinched, a flash of panic crossing her eyes before she quickly turned away, as if afraid Hoài Ca might notice something. Hoài Ca could only sense the lingering tension in the air and the unmistakable unease on the woman's face. Hoài Ca gently asked how she was doing, her voice calm and caring as always. She advised her to find a way to resolve the matter soon, not to let it drag on any longer, and to consider telling Hung so they could look for a solution together. She didn't press for details or force anything. She simply hoped that the woman wouldn't have to bear everything alone. But she shook her head firmly. Beneath her trembling voice was an unexpected resolve. She didn't want to burden Hung any further, didn't want her son, already struggling to make a living, to carry more trouble caused by her mistakes. More than that, she lacked the courage to face her past wrongdoings, the poor decisions that had led her into this situation. To her, keeping everything hidden seemed like the only way to protect her son, even if the price was a growing weight of anxiety and fear pressing ever more heavily on her heart. That evening, Hung returned home when the sky had already darkened. The warm yellow light spilling from the small house created a sense of coziness, yet an inexplicable heaviness weighed on his heart. Dinner passed simply, as it did on most days. Just a few familiar dishes, no fuss, no lengthy conversation. Tony finished eating early and was carried into the bedroom by Hoài Ca to be put to sleep. Soon, the steady rhythm of the child's breathing filled the quiet space, drawing the entire house into a deep stillness. When Tony was fast asleep, Hoài Ca returned to the living room. She sat down across from Hung, her movements slower than usual. Her gaze did not avoid his, yet she did not rush to speak. It took quite a while, until the silence felt complete, before she gently began recounting everything she had witnessed at his mother's house earlier that afternoon. Her voice was even, neither raised nor lowered, but each word carried a gravity that could not be hidden. She spoke of the unfamiliar man, of how he loudly demanded repayment, of the debt that had grown unbearably large with both principal and interest. She described his mother's panicked eyes, her trembling hands as she scraped together every last bit of money left in the house to hand over. Hoài Ca did not embellish, nor did she soften anything. She simply told the truth, exactly what she had seen, heard, and felt from the fear so clearly etched on that woman's face. Hung sat in silence from beginning to end. At first, he was stunned. Then, without realizing it, his hands clenched tightly together. Every word Hoài Ca spoke felt like another weight pressing down on his chest. Images of his mother over the past few years flashed through his mind, always saying she was fine, always forcing a smile, always insisting there was nothing to worry about. Suddenly, he realized how easily he had believed those words. The silence stretched on. Then Hung lowered his head, his voice turning hoarse. He blamed himself for being inattentive, for being so consumed by work and the pressures of making a living that he had failed to notice how desperate his mother's situation had become. He remembered the times he visited her, asking only a few cursory questions, leaving reassured the moment she said, "It's nothing." Thinking of the fear in her eyes that Hoài Ca had just described, his heart tightened with regret and self-reproach. The air in the room grew heavier than ever. Hoài Ca did not interrupt with reproach, nor did she rush to comfort him. She quietly stood up and went into the inner room. A moment later, she returned holding a thick envelope. Sitting down in front of Hung, she carefully placed it on the table, as if it contained not just money, but a shared responsibility. Slowly, Hoài Ca explained that it was all the money she had saved over a long time. Money she had set aside bit by bit, for family needs, for illness, for unforeseen hardships. She told Hung to add whatever he could and take it to repay his mother's debt, to settle it once and for all so she would no longer have to live in fear. Hung stared at the envelope in shock. He almost jumped to his feet and immediately refused. His voice was sharper than usual, not out of anger but panic. He did not want his wife to sacrifice such precious savings. He knew how frugally Hoài Ca had lived to put that money aside, how carefully she had thought about their family's future. To him, accepting it was unthinkable. He said it was his responsibility and that he could not let Hoài Ca bear it for him. He insisted he would find a way himself, no matter how difficult it might be, to take care of his mother. The words spilled out in a rush, as if he feared that if he slowed down even a little, he would lose the courage to refuse. But Hoài Ca did not argue. She did not raise her voice, nor did she force him. She simply looked at Hùng, her eyes calm, yet unwavering. Then she spoke softly, her voice lower, each word clear and firm. I am your daughter-in-law. I am part of this family. When Mom is in trouble, I can't just stand by. The sentence carried no grand sense of sacrifice, nor was it meant to persuade. It was simply a truth Hoài Ca had long accepted for herself. The room fell silent. Hùng looked at his wife, then at the envelope on the table, as a surge of emotions rose within him, pain, guilt, and a heaviness so deep he could not quite put it into words. Finally, after a long stretch of silence, Hùng choked up and slowly reached out to take the envelope. The movement was hesitant, as if he had to gather all his courage just to touch the money in front of him. In that moment, his throat went dry and his heart pounded heavily. He understood that by accepting the envelope, he was not merely taking money, but also accepting Hoài Ca's devotion, sacrifice, and the responsibility she had quietly carried all this time. Hùng lowered his head for a long while, avoiding his wife's gaze, afraid that if he looked at her any longer, his emotions would break free. That night, Hùng barely slept. He lay with his back turned toward Hoài Ca, listening to the steady rhythm of her breathing in the darkness. The room was silent, yet his mind was in turmoil. Images kept surfacing, his mother trembling before the loan shark, the fearful look Hoài Ca had described, the envelope of money lying quietly on the table. One thought followed another. Hùng realized that all this time, he had unknowingly placed the family's burdens on someone else's shoulders, while believing that everything was still fine. That sense of guilt clung to him until the first light of dawn appeared. The next morning, Hùng and Hoài Ca went together to his mother's house. The familiar road leading to the old home suddenly felt longer than usual. The scenery on both sides remained the same as always, yet their hearts were heavy. Along the way, neither of them spoke much. Hoài Ca sat beside him, gazing out the window, her face calm but thoughtful. Hùng held the bag of money tightly in his hand, torn between determination and anxiety. He knew that once he stepped through that door, nothing could be hidden anymore. When Hung's mother opened the door, she paused in surprise at seeing them arrive so early. She looked exhausted, her eyes still bearing traces of a long, sleepless night filled with worry. Hùng stepped inside and glanced around the familiar room, the place where he had grown up, where his mother had borne the weight of life alone for so many years. His heart tightened. He sat down, took a deep breath, and placed the money on the table. The gesture was firm, yet far from easy. Hùng spoke slowly, his voice low and steady. He said that he knew everything now about the debt, about what his mother had been facing, and that he had come to resolve it. He pushed the stack of money toward her and stated clearly that it was enough, 50 million, to settle the debt once and for all, so it would not drag on any longer. Then he paused for a moment, as if steadying himself, before adding that this money was the entirety of what Hoài Ca had saved over a long period of time. Those words made the room fall silent. Hung's mother froze, her eyes widening as she stared at the money on the table, then slowly shifted her gaze toward Hoài Ca. She seemed unable to believe what she was hearing. Her lips trembled as if she wanted to speak, but no sound came out. Tears began to fall, quietly, without sobbing or wailing, silently streaming down a face deeply lined by years of hardship and worry. In that moment, everything seemed to slow down. The fears she had tried to bury, the haunting memories of the past, the countless sleepless nights weighed down by debt, all of it suddenly felt small in the face of the silent sacrifice made by the daughter-in-law sitting before her. She looked at Hoài Ca for a long time. Her gaze no longer held caution or distance, but deep emotion mixed with remorse. She realized that all along, this woman had been quietly worrying for the family, willing to place her mother-in-law's well-being above her own personal plans and concerns. Her trembling hand reached out and took Hoài Ca's hand. The grip was not tight, yet it carried everything she could not put into words: gratitude, sorrow, and the acknowledgement that she had a daughter-in-law who was gentle, hard-working, and far more loving and devoted than she had ever hoped for. Her tears continued to fall, but now they were not only from fear, but from being deeply moved. Hùng stood beside them, silently witnessing it all. He felt both lighter and aching at the same time. Lighter because his mother no longer had to face everything alone, and aching because he finally recognized his own shortcomings throughout the years. Watching his mother hold Hoài Ca's hand, he understood that the decision he had made the night before, though difficult, had been the right one. From that moment on, in his mother's heart, Hoài Ca was no longer just a daughter-in-law in name. She had truly become a daughter she loved and cherished with all her heart. The invisible distance that once existed seemed to fade away, replaced by deeper trust and closeness. The small house, though still old and worn, now felt very different, warmer and lighter than before. The story comes to a gentle close. There is no dramatic climax, no grand speeches, only emotions that are real and deeply human, quietly spreading and lingering. That warmth still remains, but ahead, the life of Hùng and Hoài Ca's family will surely face new challenges waiting on the road ahead. If you felt the sincerity in this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to continue following future videos and to accompany Hoài Ca and Hùng on the journeys that lie ahead.
Xin chào tất cả mọi người đã quay trở lại với kênh của mình. Cảm ơn mọi người đã xem video. Tạm biệt.